It was the kind of afternoon that made time slow down, warm sun filtering through cottonwood trees, the breeze soft as a sigh. Just outside Flagstaff, Arizona, along a quiet stretch of highway, the Sunny Trail Diner sat like a memory from another era. The hand-painted sign above the door had faded with the years, but the place still stood tall, a relic with stories baked into the walls and kindness poured into the coffee. Inside, the lunch rush had come and gone. Only a few tables were occupied, most by locals who didn't mind the creaky chairs or the sound of cicadas humming through the open windows. The scent of grilled cheese and fresh-cut fries lingered in the air, but it was the faint barking out back that truly set this place apart. The stray dogs knew where to come. And Nina Carter, the waitress with a braid down her back and a softness in her step, always made sure they didn't leave hungry. Nina moved quietly through the diner, refilling coffees and clearing plates with the ease of someone who'd done this for most of her life. She didn't talk much unless someone needed her to. And when she had a break, she'd disappear out the back door with a paper plate of scraps, crouching in the sun while a scrappy mutt or two approached with wary eyes and hungry hearts. That's where she was headed when the bell above the door jingled. He walked in like he didn't belong, tall, silver-haired, suit too crisp for a place with peeling paint and mismatched salt shakers. Harold Stone, the billionaire real estate mogul. Widower. Known for firing people with the same calm voice he used to order lunch. But he wasn't alone. A boy followed behind him, maybe 7 years old, clinging to his father's sleeve like it was the only thing keeping him from drifting away. Lucas Stone didn't speak. Not even a whisper. His small hands were clenched tight at his sides, his eyes darting around the room like every sound was a threat. He sat down stiffly when his father pulled out a chair, his shoulders hunched like he was bracing for impact. Nina noticed right away. The boy wasn't just quiet. He was scared in a way most folks didn't understand. But she did. You learn a lot watching how animals flinch when they've been hurt. People weren't that different. She didn't ask questions. Just brought them menus and water, smiling gently. Harold ordered for both of them, barely looking up. Lucas didn't touch his food. It wasn't until they were almost finished that Nina tried something. She nodded toward the back of the diner and leaned down, her voice warm but steady. "Hey, sweetheart," she said to the boy. "Would you like to help me feed someone who's even quieter than you?" Harold raised an eyebrow, already forming a polite refusal. But before he could speak, Lucas turned his head, just slightly, and gave the smallest nod. Nina didn't react big. Just smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. She walked to the kitchen, came back with a small plastic bowl of leftover chicken and rice, and placed it gently into Lucas's hands. Together, they stepped outside. The sunlight touched the gravel as Nina led him behind the diner. There, beneath the shade of a sycamore tree, a small dog lay curled in the dirt, ribs showing, tail wagging once, then again cautiously. Lucas knelt down, his little hands trembling, and set the bowl in front of the dog. The mutt sniffed, then began to eat. And that's when it happened. Lucas smiled. Just a little. But for Harold, watching from the doorway, it was everything. The plates were nearly empty now. Harold sat back in his seat, tapping one finger against the rim of his coffee cup, his eyes scanning the diner like it was just another real estate listing. Lucas hadn't eaten much, he rarely did, just picked at his grilled cheese in silence, his shoulders curled inward like he was trying to vanish into himself. Nina approached the table quietly, her apron dusted with flour, her voice gentle. She looked at Lucas, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet understanding. "Sweetheart," she said, kneeling a little to meet his eyes. "Would you like to help me feed a friend out back? He's waiting." Harold opened his mouth, ready to say no. Ready to protect his son from yet another unpredictable variable, an animal, no less. But then something stopped him. Lucas looked at Nina. Not directly, but enough. And then slowly, he gave a tiny nod. Nina didn't make a fuss. She just smiled softly, stood up, and walked toward the kitchen. A minute later, She returned with a small plastic bowl filled with leftover stew and bits of bread, still warm. She placed it into Lucas's hands like it was something sacred. "Come on," she whispered. They stepped outside together. The sunlight was gentler here, dappled through the leaves of a crooked tree. A small dog, thin, shaking, waited near the fence, too tired to bark, too hungry to run. Lucas knelt slowly, his hands trembling. He placed the bowl down in front of the dog. The animal sniffed, then began to eat. And Lucas smiled. It was barely there, but it was real. From the doorway, Harold stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. He hadn't seen that smile in almost a year. The next day, the sun rose early over the Arizona horizon, casting long golden rays over the two-lane highway that ran past Sunny Trail Diner. Inside, the rhythm of the morning had begun, eggs sizzling, coffee brewing, and Nina Carter wiping down the counter in slow, steady circles. She looked tired, but not worn. There was a stillness to her, the kind that came from years of learning how to stay grounded when everything else trembled. The bell over the door rang just past 9. Nina glanced up and didn't flinch when she saw Harold Stone walking in again, his tailored suit looking no less out of place than it had the day before. But this time, he came alone. No Lucas. Harold didn't wait to be seated. He walked straight up to the counter and rested both palms on the worn laminate. "You got a minute?" he asked. Nina nodded once. "Sure." He didn't sit. He stood there for a long breath, then another, before finally speaking. "What did you do?" Nina raised an eyebrow. "You'll have to be more specific, sir." "My son," Harold said, his voice quiet but firm. "He hasn't gone near an animal since the accident. He hasn't smiled, or spoken. But yesterday, he fed that dog. He smiled. I saw it with my own eyes." She didn't interrupt. Just let him speak, let the silence after his words hang in the air like smoke. "So I'll ask again," Harold continued. "What did you do?" Nina gave a soft laugh, not mocking, not proud, just amused at the idea. "I didn't do anything," she said simply. Harold narrowed his eyes. "You expect me to believe that?" "I mean it," Nina replied, leaning on the counter with both hands. "Cho Hong doesn't know how to speak. And from what I can tell, your boy hasn't been ready to listen to people for a while." She looked out the window toward the sun-drenched back lot where the little dog had waited yesterday. "Maybe," she said slowly, "they understood each other. Two souls that don't need words. Just presence. Stillness." Harold was quiet, his gaze following hers. His jaw was tight, but his shoulders had lowered, just a little. "I've paid every therapist money can buy," he murmured. "Speech specialists, trauma counselors, animal-assisted therapy. None of it worked." "Well," Nina said, reaching for a clean mug and pouring him a cup of coffee, "maybe what he needed wasn't therapy. Maybe he just needed someone who didn't try too hard to fix him." She slid the cup across the counter. Harold stared down at it. "I want you to come with us," he said finally. "We're heading north tomorrow. Another stop on this so-called healing journey." Nina froze. "You want me to come with you?" "You don't have to do anything," Harold added quickly. "Just be there. Like you were yesterday." Nina hesitated. She'd been down roads like that before, good intentions that turned bad, people who didn't know how to let things be. "I've got work," she said quietly. "And I'm not exactly someone people trust around kids anymore." Harold looked up sharply. "Why not?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Let's just say, not everyone likes it when you let a child touch a dog that hasn't had its shots." They stood in silence for a beat, the clock ticking on the wall behind them. Then Harold said something unexpected. "Lucas drew a picture last night," he murmured. "It was of you. And the dog." He looked her dead in the eyes. "I've never seen him draw anything before." Her for a towel, began wiping down a perfectly clean section of the counter, like she needed something to do with her hands. "It's complicated," she said finally. "I'm not asking you to be his therapist," Harold replied, a hint of frustration rising. "Just come along. Be around. You already did more in 1 hour than the experts could in a year." Nina smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hid more than it showed. "You ever heard of Pine Hollow Rescue?" she asked, still not looking at him. Harold shook his head. "Should I have?" "I worked there," she said. 2 years. It's where I learned how to handle animals who'd been through hell. And kids who didn't know how to talk about it." Harold leaned in, curiosity flickering behind his eyes. "Then why?" "I got fired," she said, cutting him off gently. That made him pause. "I let a group of kids pet a dog that hadn't been vaccinated yet," she continued. "He was gentle, an old retriever with more scars than teeth, but it didn't matter. A parent found out. The director panicked. I was out the next day." Harold was silent. "I don't blame them," she said softly. "People are afraid. They want guarantees. I don't have those." He studied her, weighing something in his mind. "I'm not asking for guarantees either." She finally looked up at him, her eyes steady. "You say that now. But what happens when someone from your board finds out you brought your son around a woman who got canned for being too soft with a rescue dog?" "I don't answer to them when it comes to my son," Harold said. "Don't you?" Nina asked, voice calm. "Because I read the news too, Mr. Stone. And from what I remember, you've got shareholders who panic over a coffee spill." Harold didn't answer right away. He reached for the cup she'd given him earlier and took a long sip. It had gone cold, but he didn't flinch. "I'm not hiring you, Nina," he said at last. "This isn't a business arrangement." "Then what is it?" she asked. He set the cup down. "It's a father asking for help," he said. "Not because I want to fix my son, but because for the first time in a long time, I saw something yesterday, something I thought I'd never see again." Nina didn't speak. Her hands rested on the towel again. "You don't have to decide now," Harold said, standing. "We leave at dawn. I'll stop by. If you're here, I'll take that as a no. If not, well, maybe we'll see each other again someday." He turned and walked out, the bell above the door jingling once more. Nina stood in the stillness of the diner, the echoes of his words hanging in the air. She didn't know what she'd do yet. But deep in her apron pocket, folded carefully and smoothed at the edges, was a drawing, a child's sketch of her kneeling beside a little dog, sunlight shining down. Lucas had given it to her without a word. And somehow, that said everything. The afternoon sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the diner floor. Nina was wiping down the last table near the window, ready to close early. It had been a slow day, quiet in a way that usually soothed her, but today, it left her unsettled. She kept thinking about that conversation with Harold. About the offer she hadn't accepted. About the weight of a past mistake still echoing louder than it should. The bell above the door rang softly. She looked up. Lucas stood there alone, small and silent in the golden light, like a ghost from a dream you didn't know you'd had. He didn't speak, of course he didn't, but there was no fear in his eyes this time. Just focus. In his hands, folded neatly in half, was a piece of paper. He walked up to the counter and held it out to her. Nina took it gently, unfolding it with care. Inside was a child's drawing, rough lines, uneven colors, but it was unmistakable. It was her. Kneeling on the ground beside that scrawny little dog. The sun shining above them. A bowl between them. She stared at it for a long time, her throat tight. Lucas didn't say a word. He just looked at her, waiting. Something inside her shifted. Not because of Harold's money. Not because of guilt or pity or pressure. But because in that simple sketch, a quiet boy had shown her something no adult ever had. He saw her. Really saw her. And he didn't run away. Nina knelt down to meet his eyes and whispered, "All right, sweetheart. I'm coming." Lucas didn't smile. But he didn't need to. He just turned and walked out the door, knowing she'd follow. And this time, she would. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of second chances, winding through pine forests and golden fields, far from the noise of cities and the weight of expectations. Harold drove in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable for once. Nina sat in the back seat with Lucas, who stared out the window as the trees passed by in a blur of green and sunlight. This wasn't therapy. It wasn't structured or supervised or documented. It was just movement. And along the way, they made time for stillness. Every few hours they stopped, not for gas or snacks, but for something smaller. Something quieter. Nina had packed a cooler. Not with sandwiches or drinks, but with little containers she'd prepped the night before. Chopped carrots, sunflower seeds, strips of turkey, tiny balls of peanut butter rolled in oats. Each time they pulled over, whether it was a rest area, a patch of woods, or even an abandoned picnic site, Nina would gently nudge Lucas and open the cooler. He'd pick something without a word, hold it in his hands like a fragile secret, and follow her into the wild. Sometimes it was a squirrel, bold and twitchy, darting down a tree trunk. Sometimes it was a scruffy cat, too thin for its own shadow, watching from behind a dumpster. Once, it was a flock of sparrows, hopping through dry grass like tiny soldiers on a mission. Lucas never said a word. Not once. But each time he placed food down, he waited, watched, as the animal crept forward. He never forced it. Never rushed. And when the creature finally trusted enough to eat, Lucas would do the same thing, every time. He'd bow his head deeply, like he was thanking them. Like he was learning something sacred. Nina never interrupted. She just stayed close enough to be felt, far enough to let him lead. There was something holy in those moments, something bigger than psychology, deeper than any treatment plan. Harold noticed it too. He didn't say much, but he stopped pulling out his phone. Stopped pacing. Started watching. And slowly, he began sitting beside his son, not as a guardian, but as a fellow traveler. A witness. One morning, just after sunrise, they stopped at a quiet campground near a stream. Dew clung to the grass, and the world smelled like pine needles and beginnings. Nina handed Lucas a small pouch of unsalted seeds. He walked a few feet from the car and scattered them carefully along a wooden bench. Then he sat on the ground and waited. A few minutes later, a bird landed. Just one. A tiny brown sparrow with ruffled wings and eyes too big for its head. It pecked once. Twice. Lucas didn't move. The bird ate a little more. Then another one joined. Then 3. By the time 5 birds were on the bench, pecking and hopping and fluttering around, Nina realized she was holding her breath. Lucas looked over his shoulder. His eyes met hers. And this time, he did something new. He gave her the tiniest of nods, followed by the softest smile. Like he was saying, "See? They came." Nina felt tears press against her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she nodded back, just as deeply. She knew what that moment meant. Lucas wasn't just feeding the animals. He was feeding something inside himself that had been starving far too long. The campground was still wrapped in morning quiet, the sky pale with the promise of a new day. A light mist clung to the treetops, and the scent of damp earth and pine filled the air. Nina was already up, stirring oatmeal over the campfire, while Harold stood a few feet away, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold in his hand. Lucas sat near the fire pit, legs crossed, bundled in his oversized hoodie. The soft crackle of embers popped in the silence, but he didn't flinch. He was watching something, not the fire, not the trees, but the dog beside him. She was a mutt. Medium-sized, with one ear that never stood quite right and a coat patched from old injuries. Nina had rescued her years ago, and the dog had learned to trust people again the same way Lucas seemed to be doing now, one cautious inch at a time. The dog lay curled at Lucas's side, head resting on her paws, eyes half closed in contentment. She hadn't moved for 10 minutes, just breathed and stayed. Then Lucas reached out. Slowly, almost reverently, his small hand hovered above her back. His fingers trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of doing something new. And then he touched her. Just once. A light, gentle press on her fur. The dog didn't move. Lucas kept his hand there for a moment longer, then whispered something so soft, it nearly disappeared into the breeze. She didn't leave. Nina turned from the campfire. Her breath caught. She blinked fast, but it was no use. The tears came anyway, not loud or messy, just a silent stream down her cheeks. Harold saw it all from behind, frozen in place. He hadn't meant to watch. He'd meant to give them space, to let whatever was happening unfold without interruption. But when he saw Lucas reach out, heard that fragile little voice speak for the first time in months, something inside him cracked open. His hand shook so badly the coffee spilled down the side of the cup, but he didn't even notice. That one moment, a child's touch, a whisper, a dog staying still, held more weight than all the expert evaluations, all the reports and therapy sessions he'd ever paid for. Lucas hadn't said a word to his father in nearly a year. But now, he had spoken to a dog. And that dog had stayed. Harold took a step forward, then stopped. He didn't want to break the spell. He didn't want Lucas to look up and retreat again. So he stayed in place, watching like a man seeing color for the first time after living in black and white. Nina wiped her cheeks and came to kneel beside Lucas. She didn't say anything. Just placed one hand on the dog's back next to his. Lucas looked at her, not startled, not guarded. Just calm. "I think she likes me," he whispered. "She does," Nina said, her voice catching. And for once, Harold didn't try to control the moment. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't analyze or explain. He just stood there with his heart pounding and his throat tight, overwhelmed by something that felt like grace. The dog lifted her head, looked at all three of them, then rested it back down. And no one moved. Not even the wind. The morning headlines weren't about real estate markets or merger deals. They were about Nina. It started as a thread on a small dog rescue forum. Someone had recognized her face in a photo, snapped discreetly by a passing hiker who'd seen Harold Stone and his son camping with a woman and a mutt. The post was short, but sharp. "Isn't that the woman who got fired from Pine Hollow Rescue for letting unvaccinated dogs near children? And now she's working with a billionaire's kid." At first, it was just whispers. Then screenshots spread across social media. Then came the blogs, the opinion pieces, the think pieces. The tone was the same. What is Harold Stone thinking? By mid-afternoon, Harold's phone was ringing non-stop. His head of PR called first, voice tight. "This is getting traction. We've got reporters calling, shareholders messaging directly." Then came a conference call with board members. They didn't bother with pleasantries. "Harold," one of them said, "we understand you're grieving, and we respect your journey with your son. But involving a woman with a public record of negligence is, at best, reckless." Another voice cut in. "This could tank the quarterly forecast if it affects investor confidence. We've worked too hard to keep our public image polished." Polished. That was the word they always used. Like they were selling silverware, not human beings. Harold sat at his desk, the same place he'd closed billion-dollar deals, and felt a deep fatigue settle into his bones. These were men he'd built empires with. But none of them had seen his son cry himself to sleep. None of them had seen Lucas touch a living creature without flinching. "She's not working for me," Harold said, trying to keep his voice even. "That's not how it looks," someone snapped. Silence hung heavy. "You need to separate your personal life from your professional responsibilities," another voice added. "At least until the press dies down. Let the woman go. Temporarily. Let her go. Like she was an inconvenience." Harold ended the call without promising anything. But he knew what they expected. He sat in the quiet for a long while, staring at the screen, at the article headlines piling up, at his son's drawing still pinned beside his monitor, the one where Nina knelt next to the little dog, a sun shining above them. Later that evening, while the campfire cracked in front of them and Lucas dozed wrapped in a blanket, Harold stepped aside to speak with Nina. She knew before he even said a word. "The post went viral, didn't it?" she asked, poking gently at the fire. Harold nodded. "Let me guess," she continued, her tone calm, almost amused. "The men in suits want me gone." "It's temporary," Harold said. "Just until this passes over. It's politics. Optics." She didn't look at him. She just stared into the fire, the flames dancing in her eyes. "I've been here before," she said softly. "When people decide you're too much of a risk, they don't ask for your story. They just rewrite it for you." Harold's jaw tightened. "I didn't want this." "I know," she said, finally looking at him. "But you're still going to let me go." He opened his mouth to argue, but there was nothing to say. She stood, brushing ash from her jeans. "I'll be gone before sunrise," she said. "No drama. No goodbyes." And with that, she walked toward the tent where Lucas slept, to say goodbye quietly without waking him. Harold stood in the darkness, holding a decision that felt like betrayal in one hand, and regret in the other. The next morning, Nina was gone. No footsteps on gravel. No clink of a metal spoon in a tin cup. Just absence, sharp and undeniable. The camp felt colder without her, quieter in a way that didn't feel peaceful. Harold didn't sleep much the night before. He'd sat by the fire long after it had burned down to embers, thinking about all the words he didn't say. The ones that might have made a difference, or maybe not. He wasn't sure anymore. He told Lucas over breakfast that Nina had gone home. The boy didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared at the empty seat where she'd sat the night before, hands clenched tight in his lap, his cereal untouched. Harold didn't try to explain. How do you explain to a child that kindness can become controversial? That sometimes adults let go of the people who make them feel safest, just to keep their reputations clean? They packed up and moved on, a different route, a new stop. But the rhythm of their trip had changed. Lucas stopped reaching for the cooler. Stopped looking out the window with that quiet curiosity. The nods after feeding animals, those little sacred bows, were gone. 3 days passed like that. Until Harold found the envelope. It had been slipped into the side pocket of his overnight bag, tucked between a folded flannel shirt and a half-used bottle of sunblock. His fingers brushed against it like a whisper, and he pulled it free. A simple, hand-folded card. No stamp. No name on the outside. He opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing, done in Lucas's unmistakable style. Crayon lines, thick and uneven, but filled with intent. Nina stood beside the little dog, both of them drawn with halos of soft yellow light. But this time, Lucas had drawn himself too, standing beside them. Holding their hands. Beneath the sketch, in blocky childlike letters, were just a few words. "You're not like anyone else. You didn't leave." Harold sat down hard on the edge of the bed, the card trembling in his hands. He didn't know when Lucas had drawn it, or how Nina had ended up with it, or when she'd slipped it into his things. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the message. Harold had told himself it was just temporary, that removing Nina from the trip was a necessary move to avoid trouble. But deep down, he knew it was cowardice. A calculated retreat. A failure to protect not just Nina, but the progress his son had made. He looked over at Lucas, who sat on the edge of the cabin porch, staring at the woods but seeing nothing. He was shutting down again. And Harold knew, if he didn't do something soon, he might lose that light in Lucas for good. The card rested in his lap, its colors bright against the dull gray of his pants. "You didn't leave," he whispered, reading the words again. But I did. The weight of that truth settled on his shoulders like the heaviest deal he'd ever made. And for the first time in a long, long while, Harold Stone, billionaire, decision-maker, fixer of broken buildings, realized he couldn't buy his way out of this. He needed to make it right. He needed her back. The sun was already setting by the time Harold made the call. He sat alone in a small roadside motel room, the curtains drawn halfway, the TV humming low in the background but ignored. His laptop sat open on the desk in front of him, surrounded by silence, the kind that wasn't peaceful, just heavy. The headlines had started to quiet. The stock had stabilized. The board had moved on to other concerns. But Harold hadn't. He couldn't. The card from Lucas still lived in his breast pocket, folded, worn, read too many times to count. He ran his thumb over the crease while the phone rang. On the third ring, someone picked up. "Yeah?" the voice said, tired, cautious. "I'm looking for someone who worked at Pine Hollow Rescue," Harold said. "About 2 years ago. Name's Nina Carter." There was a pause. Then a breath. "I know Nina," the woman replied. "This about that nonsense in the papers?" "I'm trying to get the truth," Harold said simply. "Well," the woman said, her voice softening, "then I'm glad you called." She told him everything. How Nina had taken the late shifts, the tough cases, the animals too frightened to be touched. How she was the only one who didn't flinch when a dog growled or when a child cried. How she let the kids sit in the pens, not because it was protocol, but because sometimes the safest place for a scared soul was next to another one that didn't expect anything. She didn't do anything wrong, the woman said firmly. She was just the only one brave enough to believe kids and animals deserved to heal together. Some folks didn't like that. Said it was risky. She let that hang. "But if you're asking me," she added, "that woman's got more heart than the whole damn staff combined." Harold didn't say much after that. Just thanked her and hung up. Then he opened the console on the rental SUV. It had taken him a few tries to find the right timestamp. But eventually, he did. The camera footage was grainy, nothing special. Just a quiet morning at camp, the sun barely risen. Lucas sat near the fire pit, alone, with the old mutt curled beside him. What Harold saw next stopped his breath. Lucas reached out, no one around, no one watching, and stroked the dog's back slowly, tenderly, with a kind of reverence that broke something open in Harold's chest. Then the boy began to hum. Not loud. Not perfect. But familiar. A lullaby. The same one his mother used to sing to Lucas every night before the accident. Harold's hand trembled as he leaned closer to the screen. Lucas wasn't just repeating a tune. He was remembering her, connecting her to something alive again. Something safe. Something Nina had helped unlock. Tears welled in Harold's eyes, but he didn't blink them away. He watched the rest of the clip like it was sacred. When it ended, he sat back, the room spinning slightly. Nina hadn't pushed. She hadn't coached. She had just been there. And somehow in her presence, Lucas had found his way back to something he'd lost. A mother's voice, a father's hope, a world that still had softness in it. Harold wiped his face and reached for his phone again. This time, there was no hesitation. He knew exactly who he needed to call. And for once, there would be no scripts, no business tone, no polished image to protect. Just a father, ready to speak with his heart, not his name. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Hello." Her voice was cautious, like she didn't recognize the number, or maybe she did, and wasn't sure she wanted to. Harold paused, caught off guard by the sound of it. This was the first time he'd heard her voice through a line, not across a table or beside a campfire. And for once, he didn't speak like a man used to being obeyed. "Nina," he said quietly, "it's Harold." A silence followed, not cold, just waiting. He took a breath. "I watched the footage. Of Lucas. With your dog." He was humming the lullaby, the one my wife used to sing to him. Still no answer, but he could hear her breathing now, steady listening. "I didn't call to explain," he said. "I called to say I was wrong." Nina didn't interrupt. "I let fear make the decision," Harold continued. "But what you gave my son, it's more than anyone's ever managed to reach." There was a long pause. Then she spoke, soft but firm. "I never needed you to believe in me, Harold. I just needed you not to be afraid of what we were trying to do." He closed his eyes. "I'm not afraid anymore." The bell above the diner door rang just past noon. Nina looked up from the back booth where she was reviewing some flyers, half expecting a delivery guy or a regular. Instead, she saw Harold Stone, not in a suit this time, but in a worn jacket, dust on his shoulders and something soft in his expression she hadn't seen before. In his hands, he held a small box. He walked straight to her table without waiting for an invitation. When he placed the box down, his voice was calm but carried weight. "He asked me a question," Harold said, "for the first time in almost a year." Nina looked up, curious. Harold opened the box gently. Inside was a porcelain dog bowl, the kind you didn't find in chain stores. Glazed ivory white, with a single name etched along the side in deep blue letters, Lucas. Beside it, a brand-new leather leash, soft and sturdy, coiled neatly. "He looked at that old mutt this morning," Harold said, his voice catching, "and asked, 'Can I keep her?'" Nina's eyes softened, her hand instinctively moving to the bowl. "I told him yes," Harold added. "And I told him we'd do it right, together." For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Nina smiled. "I guess she's got a home now." "She's not the only one," Harold said. Nina didn't return to the diner full-time after that. Instead, a few weeks later, she stood beside Harold and Lucas on the front steps of a modest building with a handmade sign that read, "Gentle Friends, Healing Hearts with Pause and Patience." The program welcomed children like Lucas, kids with soft voices, shaky hands, and stories no one had the patience to hear. Nina wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a co-founder, a guide, and a reminder that healing didn't always come in hospitals or offices. Sometimes, it came in the form of a stray dog, and a second chance. The community center was filled with folding chairs, homemade cookies, and the kind of warmth that couldn't be manufactured. Parents, teachers, neighbors, even a few curious reporters, had come to hear about Gentle Friends, the new animal-assisted program for children with trauma, fear, or just too many quiet thoughts. At the front of the room, a banner hung loosely from the ceiling, painted by hand, "Gentle Friends, where healing has a tail." Nina stood to one side, her palms slightly damp, but her smile steady. She wasn't used to attention, not like this. But today wasn't about her. It was about a boy. Lucas sat in a small wooden chair, legs swinging just above the floor, a little dog nestled close beside him. Lucky, that was her name now. Scrappy, loyal, hers and his. The crowd settled when Nina stepped back and gently nodded toward Lucas. He looked at her once, not for help, but for reassurance. Then slowly he stood. His hands fidgeted for a moment before he placed one gently on Lucky's back. "My name's Lucas," he said, his voice clear and small. "I used to be scared of everything." A pause. The room held its breath. "But I'm not scared of Miss Nina. And I'm not scared of Lucky." The audience didn't erupt. They didn't need to. Just a wave of tears, smiles, and a silence so deep it felt like prayer. Nina wiped her cheek, not hiding it this time. And Harold, standing off to the side, arms crossed over his chest, lowered his head, the tightness in his jaw finally gone. Lucas sat back down, wrapping an arm around Lucky's neck. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "That boy's going to be okay." And he was. Because sometimes, the creatures we think are too broken to matter become the ones who teach us how to stay. If you believe that kindness doesn't need a degree, just a heart, leave a like on this video. And if you want to hear more stories that heal, that soften the rough edges of life, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We'll see you next time, right here on Justice Reloaded HD.